It is October 18th, 2022, and this is going to be a Lake Stevens City Council workshop, and it is hybrid, although we have all the city council members here tonight, which is great. We're down in the mill on 1808 Main Street, and this is recorded and will be posted to our city YouTube page the next couple of days. So with that, I will I'll call the meeting to order and hand the agenda over to President Johnson.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Director Garceau, if you could update us on item.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm here to talk about the Amazon Smile. We're going to fix the mic. Thank you. So in my final packet, it looks like I may not have saved properly for a staff report as it wasn't included. So I apologize about that. It didn't include some of my preliminary information, and I'm just now realizing that. But as a whole, what Amazon Smile is when you shop on Amazon.com, anybody and everybody from the public can just change their internet domain and start at smile.amazon.com. And by doing so, you're able to choose a nonprofit foundation who is registered with the program of Amazon Smile. It's the charitable portion of Amazon. And all of the prices are the same. Everything is the same when you get into Amazon. But upon checkout, a percentage of 0.5, so 0.5%, Amazon donates back to charitable foundations. So it doesn't cost us anything. It's just a behavior in order to support charities. And I had the idea that although we don't heavily use Amazon, of course, we follow all procurement policies. We choose local when we can, always look for low prices. When we are already shopping on Amazon, I thought it would be great if we can have permission as city employees to choose a local foundation in order to just help generate an extra 0.5% that stays right here in our community. One of the foundations I would like to support is the Arts and Parks Foundation, as we already work closely with them as a city, and they do great things to beautify our parks as well as arts within the entire city. There are an overwhelming amount of locations that are registered on Smile. Some of the other ones locally would be the Snohomish County Search and Rescue. There is the Lake Stevens Food Bank, Lake Stevens Library, Lake Stevens Senior Center, and the list goes on. So I had the question I tried to bring up internally, and we thought it was best in the hands of council to have a discussion, ask questions, and decide if we can proceed.
Any questions, council, for staff?
For clarity, Sarah, do we pick one and then we're stuck with that one? Or how does that work? Just to be sure.
I think that's a great question, and I might defer to see if
you can change it. You can, so if you go in,
I
for a while, I think I had the Arts and Parks. I think I've switched mine to the Friends of the Library. So whatever your flavor of the day is, you can change it.
I think it'd be good for the city, for us, if we're going to do this. I think it's a great idea, but to have some sort of a guideline about, maybe we switch it every 6 months so that we're benefiting multiple foundations and nonprofits within our city, and that we make sure that we know which ones are local so that we're not leaving anybody out. But
right, it might be a great opportunity. I think a lot of people don't know about this in the city, and it might be a good social media post for us for awareness, and not necessarily choose one for people, but give the opportunity to choose any of them.
and maybe if we're going to put it out there, if ask for folks that are part of a nonprofit, if they want to be considered as one of the ones that we choose, to let us know that they're out there, and
Put it out to everybody
yeah.
and everyone choose.
So Angie, how would you prioritize like the selection process? Like, how do you choose the?
I think just random.
Or do you just?
I think if you have like 10, then randomly, you pick one every 6 months, and
Just rotate.
yep.
All right.
I like the Google coin flip method myself. But,
That is a way.
Any other questions?
I have a question that is likely for Barb or Greg or both. I guess and my question is gonna sound less altruistic, so I'm just gonna apologize up front. What prevents the city from creating a 501c3 that allowed us to use that opportunity to generate funds for activities within the city as another means of generating revenue, although recognizing it wouldn't generate significant revenue? Sidewalks still have to get made.
Sarah Scott Trent.
In my experience in the 14 years I've worked with Parks and Rec, we've always just partnered with an existing foundation, or sometimes it is a foundation that it was originally created with the idea from the city, but it does have to be a separate body. They are their own entity that reports to the state. So you wouldn't be able to vote as a city council on how they spend their budget. But in my experience, the police has partnered with like a local search and rescue or Parks and Rec with the Arts and Parks Foundation, and then it's mutual understanding. And I did start the conversation on the back end of the Arts and Parks Foundation to say, hey, would you be willing to partner with us so we can continue to write grants for nonprofit foundations? There are thousands of grants we'd be able to go after for parks if we were able to leverage their nonprofit status. And so I think more you do it based on projects or on ideas versus just creating a blanket one for the city.
That would actually be the Arts and Parks Foundation going after the grant, though, not the city of Lake Stevens.
Correct. It would be written under the foundation, although in my experience, often they don't necessarily have always the correct members to help write those grants.
Right.
And so we would create mutual agreements where staff can help put together the grants with the understanding of the project would be supported after the fact.
And definitely asking the question, not from the idea of, I certainly recognize the definition of a component reporting element of the district and of the city, and certainly not suggesting that, just asking the question in general.
Yeah, because I mean, there's no provision in statute that allows a municipal corporation to establish different 501(c)(3)s to do different functions or whatever. But as Sarah noted, we can partner with 501(c)(3)s to basically accomplish the same thing. Whether it's the Parks Foundation or if there are other out there similar to that, that we could have a mutually beneficial relationship with, we could do that.
Thank you.
Any other input from council? All right, thank you, Sarah, for that.
Council President, can
yeah.
I just make one comment? We've had a glitch in our Soda Clerk system that does the electronic packet. So Sarah did submit all of her materials on Friday. So did Aaron. I apologize. I'm fixing it right now online for everybody else to see so you can see their staff reports, but it was not them. It was unfortunately the system. And the same thing happened with our some of our planning commission materials. So I apologize for that. I'm fixing it and I'm going to resend it out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Director Halverson, we get a update on the Public Works fleet replacement plan.
Yes, Councilmember Ewing, thank you. For those of you in the audience, my name is Aaron Halverson. I'm the Public Works Director. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Pleased to be here tonight to discuss a project we've been working on for several weeks regarding fleet replacement planning. I have a presentation, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oh, no.
Oh, Aaron, let me give you permission. Hold on. Okay, try it now.
Okay. Okay. Move on. So tell them, you always tell them what you're going to tell them. So what we're going to go through 4 parts of this presentation. What is equipment and fleet management? To define it. What is the state of the fleet? What is the future of the fleet and options for fleet retention and management? What is equipment and fleet management? It is what it sounds like. It's management of equipment and fleet by performing proactive maintenance, tracking your fleet, making sure you have the parts you need to maintain your fleet, analyzing costs, recording, documenting maintenance history and issues, defining replacement cycles, and vehicle procurement. I'm going to focus tonight's presentation on the final 3 bullets. I think the top 4 bullets are interesting to people like me, but they might not be interesting to all of you. What is the state of the fleet? There are 88 pieces of equipment or vehicles. What does that mean? There are 41 pieces of equipment, which are vehicles that are greater than 1 ton, excavators, sweepers, vector trucks, mowers, remote mowers. That's kind of the equipment bucket. I need to, excuse me, I wasn't projecting that properly. 36 light duty vehicles, which are passenger vehicles less than 1 ton. The Ford Taurus out in front of City Hall, Escapes, all of those things, and then essentially light duty trucks. And then there are 11 trailers, heavy and light duty trailers, dump trailers, and really light landscaping trailers. The average year that these pieces of equipment were manufactured or sold to the city is 2014. The median year is 2017 for what it's worth. And the estimated value at the time of purchase, 4.1 million. Okay. In terms of health, the average mileage on vehicles that track mileage is 47,000 miles. Average hours, 1,263. Vehicle inspections are performed before each use for equipment and CDL vehicles. And then we also have a form in Teams to track vehicle health and do an inspection when vehicles are refueled. That's for light duty vehicles. We have 1 equipment mechanic. The highest mileage in a vehicle is 403,000 miles. That's quite a lot for us, but it's a dump truck, so they tend to accumulate miles. And then the highest hours is our older backhoe at 2,909 hours. Any questions on this slide? Yes, Councilman.
I'm just really curious about the dump trucking.
Me too.
Especially a lot of miles.
When was it
It's a
purchased?
diesel.
How old is it?
Do you want me to do that now? I can, let me
It's
come
okay,
back
I'm
to it.
just curious.
Let me come back. I do-
It's more of a fun
I'm
fact.
just, yeah, it's totally fun fact.
Let's come back to it. I think it is interesting. Okay. In terms of the problem statement, what does this all mean? The city's fleet grew rapidly over the past 10 to 15 years. And with a rapidly growing fleet, we have a rapidly aging fleet. And it makes sense that it's growing rapidly during that period. The city has grown a lot. And so when we annex areas, we need more vehicles, we need more employees. That makes sense. The challenge is they're aging out, right? So it is my belief, and it's true. It is in the best interest of the city to plan for fleet replacement cycles and to explore funding alternatives. Make sure that when we get in a truck to go plow and sand the streets, that it does that thing for a week or 2. And we ran into some trouble last year. Hopefully we fixed it. Okay. Future of the fleet, current state. I'll do my best to explain this. Please stop me if I'm going too quickly or too slow for that matter. In terms of light duty vehicles, retention, right now their average is about 8 years old. Equipment is about 9 years and trailers are about 5 years. So we've bought more trailers recently. The average age of the fleet right now is 8. And now, okay. If we keep going the way we're going in terms of budget, in 10 years, the average age of the fleet will be 16 years. In 20 years, the average age of the fleet will be 23 years. And in 2053, 30 years from now, the average age of the fleet will be 27 years. I do like the car. They do tend to have reliability challenges unless they're kept up, I suppose. Anyway, in terms of the average allocation for fleet procurement, it's $200,000 a year. Maintenance costs 180, that's kind of just salary and benefits and supplies and things like that, for an annual cost of $380,000. That's the current state. Let's move on. Scenario one. I have a lot of data to back this up, and I'm happy to share it with you. So the first scenario, let's take a look at an option to replace our light duty vehicles every 5 years, and equipment every 10, and trailers every 15. And you can see we hold an age of about 8 years for vehicles. Great. We have a new fleet. Problem is it costs $837,000 a year to do that thing. Maintenance costs are low because we're just changing oil and air filters primarily, you know, hitting the Zerk fittings, things like that. But the cost is $881,000 for this scenario. Not really realistic necessarily. Okay. I ran another model. Scenario two, medium-term retention, 10, 15, and 20 retention periods with an average fleet of 14 years, age of fleet 14 years. The average annual cost, $489,000. If the council puts away, or the budget includes essentially a vehicle rent of $489,000 a year, we can do this thing. We can keep our fleet at about 14 years old. Light duty at 10 years, so it's not unreasonable. Maintenance costs start to come up a little bit. Annual cost $621,000. Scenario three, long-term retention, 15 for light duty vehicles, 20 years for equipment, and 25 for trailers with an average age of 19 years. Costs are down $392,000 a year. Great. Maintenance really starts to go up. 264 is probably on the low end, 264,000 for annual maintenance costs. But we're not doing ourselves any favors. The maintenance is going to exceed the savings in the end. Okay. There's a lease scenario. I'm almost done with the scenarios. Lease scenario is a 5-year retention. We're going to lease. The option is to lease light duty vehicles. Equipment retention at 15, trailer retention at 20. We can keep our vehicles around 12 years on average, 12 years old. And the cost is $441,508 each year. Maintenance costs drop. So to summarize, the city's fleet grew rapidly over the past 10 to 15 years. To take a look at that, to evaluate that, we've drafted a replacement schedule, run these models. And again, it's in the best interest of the city to begin planning for replacement of these vehicles. The sooner the plan is implemented, the less impact to the budget there will be. Any questions so far? I'm going to show you guys a spreadsheet for less than 30 seconds and then pass this off.
Aaron, I guess my first question is where the years of retention equate to depreciation of the vehicle itself.
Yes. Let me share. So, okay, so here are the scenarios that we laid out. Is it showing yet? Here, just give it a minute. There we go. Here are the 4 scenarios. There's a 5th.
Where it breaks even. Is that what you're talking?
Yeah.
Where it breaks even. Let's see if I answer your question, and then if I don't, let's
Oh, depreciation, every year the vehicle becomes less and less until
Yeah.
essentially the vehicle has no value and then you replace it. So my question is, are these schedules, are these scenarios tied to that retention? And I guess the next point is to which percentage, because a retention, the depreciation probably has a set number. So if we have 8 years of the current state, I'm assuming that's not tied to depreciation at all currently. And 5 might be a very aggressive retention schedule, and 10 is probably a much extended depreciation schedule.
Yes.
So just asking how that works out together.
Sure, I'll show you. So here is the data behind all of this. This is a giant spreadsheet. It lists every one of the vehicles, the type, the mileage, the value, It includes the rent that I described,
Mhm.
an inflation calculation based on 5%. We could set it for whatever we want, but 5% right now is probably low. And then it runs the years for replacement. But you're describing a situation where, let's go here, revenue at surplus, which is essentially depreciation. The depreciation rate is 12% a year,
All right.
which is kind of high right now, but not beyond belief. So it is all in there.
Aaron, how variable is that depreciation rate? It's currently 12%. How variable is that? And what determines that variableness?
I'm not an expert in depreciation, but I did a little bit of research in it. And it does tend to vary. So right now, I think we're seeing used vehicles have a really high value. So they're not depreciating very quickly. But
Yeah.
if there's less demand,
Historically, it's
12% seemed to be a reasonable number based on research.
Are you thinking more useful life then? If the depreciation schedule is less, not that it's hard to put useful life, but if the value is higher, you get a little more useful life out of it now because the value is higher versus surplus it and get funds.
Yeah, you have to balance that, right?
Right.
Yeah, and that's kind of that's why I ran those scenarios is when should we be selling these things?
Exactly. Or surplus.
There's a sweet spot, and maybe it's not 5, 10, maybe it's something like 8 years, but at least we have a model that we can run at this point.
So Aaron, one thing I know, diesels tend to have significantly longer lifespans, vehicles, and I don't, is there a delineation for that for the equipment that's diesel versus gas powered to help us understand in terms of hours of the engine for either a piece of equipment or a vehicle?
No, but I think that's a great idea, is adding a useful life column so we can see what that looks like, what that does.
Yeah, because I know, like, for example, a diesel lawnmower is going to last significantly longer than a gas one,
Sure.
just by virtue of the engine for a diesel vehicle.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I guess the other question is, our mandate is, I don't know what it's like, 2030, they're outlawing gasoline powered vehicles in Washington State. So, I'm not sure how that's going to impact this whole process because, that whatever the governor's mandate is, something that we're going to need to be mindful of.
Good point.
Not to get too far in the weeds, but wouldn't you also have a higher maintenance cost on diesel vehicles? Right? It's just a specialty of it.
So if it costs more than the maintenance, then we have a higher maintenance on it. It'll last longer, but it'll cost more to maintain.
I'm probably gonna jump way ahead. I'm curious, well, I'm gonna ask one more question and then I'm gonna ask you the brass tacks question. Was the lease option a 100% leased fleet? Because I know a lot of times those lease options that are presented aren't always 100%. Sometimes there's a variable mix of lease and owned and.
Well, the lease would only be for light duty vehicles.
Okay.
And so back to that metric, I've got them here. I can just sum them. But, it's okay. It's something like 40 vehicles or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So roughly about half.
36.
And the idea, Aaron, under the lease was like an initial 10 and then was it 5 after that per year?
It's essentially 20 to 25% each year,
So like 25%.
10 or so each year.
So we'd have to get to it'd take 4 years to get us to 100% leased-ish.
So can I segue? We actually have
With the expert in the room.
an expert. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I have a PowerPoint.
Yes, you do. Hang on.
While we're queuing that up, great questions. And I think when you think depreciation, there's kind of really 2 components. Right? There's the depreciation for money. First, there's, I guess, 3 components. There's depreciation for useful life, which kind of is its own thing. Okay. Thank you. And then, of course, there's also looking at, what is the vehicle appreciating versus what it's valued. So I'll get into all that. And it looks like we're ready to go, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Laura Clark, I'm with Enterprise Fleet Management. I'm an account executive up there. So my goal with the company is to onboard new partnerships. I've been with the company for about 11 years. The prior 7-ish years, we've really sort of honed into what our partnerships look like in the government space specifically. We've got about 2,000 government partnerships nationwide at this point, and roughly 60 in the state of Washington. You probably are more familiar with Enterprise Rent a Car. If you travel, we hope that you travel with us. The fleet division, though, specializes, again, with government agencies and commercial businesses that operate a fleet of vehicles that they own today. And like Aaron mentioned, our primary goal is to help you figure out what is the optimal time to replace a vehicle based on its value, based on what you paid for it, maintenance, fuel, et cetera. And how can we help you implement a more predictable plan? So that's going to be the primary focus of my presentation today. So I'll get through it, I think, pretty quickly, I hope, just to be respectful of your all's time. I think Aaron did a great job summarizing the State of the Union today. The moral story is the city's fleet is aged, and that's very, very, very common. So I really commend staff and faculty for looking at a solution to try to figure out how to lower the age of the fleet. Naturally, that would mean safer vehicles, it'll mean more reliable transportation, certainly an easier budgeting process, and then of course, less carbon footprint. So you hit on the 2030, that's the plan is that by then they won't sell any more gas engines. There has to be a pretty big advance in the EV technology between now and then for that to be sustainable. But certainly that's something that we can help with, and definitely we're keeping our finger on the pulse of what's going on in the electric market. So our goal as your partner, if you allow us to be that, would be every year continuing to look at what options are coming out, what hybrid options are there, what electric options are there, and how do we help you gear up to get to that goal of by 2030 require only electric. Questions so far?
Yeah, I got a question. I get into this conversation all the time with community transit, et cetera. We're trying to go electric. The problems that we see there is with the infrastructure, not with the buses. I mean, the buses will do it, but the infrastructure is really important. But when we're talking about it here in this setting, we're only talking about the light duty vehicles, pickups,
Cars.
Explorers, cars, those kinds of things. That's it, right?
Yes, so for the enterprise specific conversation, it's anything up to 26,000 gross vehicle weight rating. So the dump truck, for example, would fall into that category, potentially depending on how it's weighted. Think of like an F550 with, maybe a service body. Does that answer your question?
Okay.
So we've had a similar presentation for information with our police fleet. And so I'm curious to know if you also partner with for police vehicles. And I guess a segue to that is, would we actually be able to get vehicles? Because last year we haven't got any vehicles this year. That's correct from Ford. So maybe you have access to things that we don't.
Yeah, so part 2 is complicated. Certainly we can help navigate that as best as possible, but the market it's difficult. I mean, everyone has less access to vehicles. So I don't have the perfect solution there. I guess part 1 on the ERVs, we can lease you black and whites, we can do the fully, outfitted, everything. So there's no difference between what we'll talk about here for the police vehicles, with the exception of likely they'll be on a different life cycle, and usually that's tied more to engine hours or safety or something different than for kind of your standard white fleet. As far as availability, 3 million less vehicles were produced model year over model year, which is significant. So we have been impacted by that as well. However, we have the ability to acquire from any manufacturer. We're getting information from the manufacturers directly about when order banks are opening, what isn't available, what likely is to be canceled. So for example, if you're ordering a transit, you're better off ordering an all-wheel drive than not, because that's more likely to be built. So all of those things, and this is our core business as Enterprise Rent a Car. We own and operate the largest fleet in North America. So in that, part of our conversations are bringing you information that can help you position yourself to be more likely to get vehicles.
I guess if we haven't had that conversation already with our chief and other staff, I mean, I know this is a public works focused, but certainly some.
So just briefly here, I wanted to touch on, I mentioned before, kind of the scope of our partnerships in the government space. Here's a few names, it's obviously a small sample of what we have nationally. I know some folks on the staff and faculty have talked to folks that are partners of ours, but at any point in the process, if you'd like additional references or points of contact, we're happy to provide that. Go to the next slide. Oh, I think up on that slide, actually, I apologize. From a due diligence perspective, the city is members of Sourcewell, and Enterprise competitively bid and won a piggybackable contract through Sourcewell. So if you decide to move forward, certainly that is a good option so that you circumvent the RFP process. You really kind of touched on this earlier when there was questions about depreciation and useful life. So there's a lot of components, and no doubt, you know, like the conversation of that diesel will run longer. Absolutely, that's true. And yes, it also will cost more to maintain. The biggest component that we look at in the government space in particular is the equity, the value of the vehicle. So similar to Enterprise Rental Car, we have very, very good buying power, just like you do as a government agency. So in some cases, we can actually acquire vehicles and then run them for 12 months and sell them for more than what we paid for them. And that model applies in the government space as well. Now, that said, there are other scenarios where maybe the sweet spot is 3 years, maybe it's 5 years, but there's always going to be a point in time where the vehicle's worth X and you can avoid increased costs in fuel and maintenance by selling it at that time. So it's not necessarily when the vehicle doesn't have useful life left, it's more about what is that sweet spot, how do we capitalize on the equity and then control lower fuel and maintenance expenses. So Aaron touched on that a little bit earlier, but what we see in this space is that typically that's somewhere between 12 and 60 months. The other piece I have on here, the open-end equity lease, a lot of times when people hear the word lease, they think of a net lease, which is what you may personally have done through a dealership. The equity lease is basically a finance to a dollar amount. So I think Aaron's illustration earlier did a good job of showing you the lease is really just a tool to bridge the funding gap. So if you're going to go from replacing vehicles every 10, 15, 20 years to replacing them, let's say every 5 years, you either have to triple your capital budget, right? Or you need to find a different way to fund vehicles. So most of our clients, like 99% of our clients, with the exception of some places where there's grant funding and the grant suggests something else, will take advantage of the open-end equity lease. Again, it's a finance to a dollar amount, no mileage penalty, no wear and tear penalty. The vehicle belongs to the city or the bank. You're essentially the person leasing the vehicle or the entity leasing the vehicle. You can upfit it, you can logo it. If you decide that you want to keep it past the lease term, you have all rights to do that. And most importantly, the equity belongs to the city at the end of the term. Questions so far? Okay. Yep. And I think if you click this on a couple times, it should, yeah, great. So this is just a visual aid to show you that buying power that I referenced before. So in this example, this is a couple years old vehicle, but the scenario still holds true. So if you were buying that vehicle personally, MSRP, you pay $34,000 roughly. As a government agency, you can acquire the same vehicle for less than $28,000. That vehicle below was a real auction numbers. So that vehicle 12 months old, 10,000 miles on it, which is a little bit more than what you do today, sells for $31,000. So in the example that the city had leased that vehicle through Enterprise, ran it 12 months, did 2 oil changes, you can go in every 6 months to get the oil change, and then had to sell it on your behalf, you would have actually made $3,100. Now, in a scenario that that's too aggressive or operationally, you just don't have an appetite to do that, you can see kind of how it plays out. 2 years in, you're basically at break even. At the 5-year point, you only depreciated at $9,000. And then by 10 years, you essentially lost that upfront advantage because of how much value the vehicle's lost.
So Laura, the pricing advantage is that for 23 vehicles for 2023? I guess you're modeling year 23. what, are we seeing similar percentages as far as government pricing that reflect something similar to what you're showing here?
Yes and no, it depends on the model. The government incentives have decreased significantly in the last 2-3 years with the whole chip shortage and COVID and all the other things that are impacting the vehicle market. That said, right now, like Eric said, because the used market is so strong, it's offsetting where your incentives are lighter. We're selling your vehicles for more than we were 3 years ago. So it's kind of a push there if you proactively plan with us, ordered in time to actually receive your vehicles, and then we're able to sell them. Because clearly we would sell a vehicle if we didn't have a replacement. That answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. And we do hope that the market normalizes, probably not for 2 or 3 more model years, but at some point we'll get back to a new normal and the government incentives should ramp back up at that point. Just real quick on safety, I think it's obvious, but naturally a newer vehicle has more safety technology. I don't know what everyone in the room drives, but if you have anything that's 2012 or newer, you've got electronic stability control, which physically keeps your vehicle on 4 tires in slippery or treacherous conditions. 2018, you started to see the introduction of rear view camera and the side, the side alert as someone's approaching the vehicle. So obviously safety is important, and one of the intangible benefits of moving to a proactive replacement plan, aside from the savings, is knowing that you have your staff in the safest possible vehicles in the community. Certainly operationally, it's an easier process. Vehicles are breaking down less often. There's less moments where you have to come up with a plan B. And I think I mentioned earlier, but the general budgeting process is a lot easier when you're on a proactive plan. Moving on. This is the comprehensive analysis that Enterprise put together on behalf of the city. So we reviewed this in prior meetings. And I know the print is really small, but moral of the story is if you move with your light duty fleet to this model that we're proposing, over the next 10 years, we'll save the city about $500,000. But that includes the cost of doing business with Enterprise, it includes the cost associated with the lease. And it means you get to have newer, safer, more reliable transportation, which I would argue is worth investing in. So the fact that you can do it as a savings is, I think, pretty awesome. And last but not least, the proposal. Aaron had touched on a bunch of different scenarios. One that we had put together, and again, I apologize if the print is small, but this just shows you if you were to move forward and you were to lease 22 vehicles, what it would look like from a total capital budget perspective. So the number that you would care about, I think on there, it's basically $210,000 in your capital budget, and you get to acquire 22 new vehicles. So if you think of it from the perspective of why would we lease versus paying cash like we've done before, it's because you can lease 22 vehicles for $210,000, where if you pay cash for those, like Aaron mentioned before, you have to significantly increase your capital budget. So that was all very high level. I'm happy to go as deep as you want. I just wanted to be respectful and let you guys know what questions you have.
Can you please describe to council the equipment that could be put on the vehicles and how that's brought in and the maintenance component as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So from an equipment perspective, really anything that you could possibly want to add to the vehicle, you can. Again, unlike a net lease, this is really your vehicle. So if you want a service body put on it, we can actually do that for you. We would take it to a certified vendor. If you have toolboxes or ladder racks or decals or something you want to install internally, certainly you can do that as well. The question was asked earlier about the police vehicles. We are working with several different police agencies, so we can help you get the interceptor and then gut it and then rebuild it and the radios and the sirens and everything else. Does that answer anything on that piece?
Yeah, essentially we would come up with a spec for each truck, right? So if it's a parks truck, it's got XYZ on it. If it's a public works truck, it's got ABC on it. That's in the system. So whenever the city of Lake Stevens wants a parks truck, you order it out and it comes just like that. And that cost is built into the model. And the same with the maintenance. We could do the maintenance ourselves and keep our own records, or you could build it into the program where the oil change and safety inspections are done by a vendor in town. They can go to them, they do that, they keep the records, gets built into this model. So both things are in there. We're not spending our time. But the decals on all the lighting and all that, if you've ever been involved in installing a car stereo, you remember ripping out the dash and all that, that's in every vehicle that we do. So this particular program, if we chose, you could build that in. If we still want to do it ourselves, you buy a white truck, they can provide that too.
They're still as profitable year one.
Correct.
So, because year one, they seem to be profitable. So every year we would just continue to say, hey, we want certain vehicles. So every year we would cycle through a vehicle and make them profitable for the city every single year with the changes, everything as well.
It's just a huge time saver, right? So when we get a new truck, Chris takes, however long it takes for him to go through it and add all that stuff to it. Whereas under this program, as soon as it goes through the gate, we're ready to throw our tools in and go.
I'm just asking if the same profitability is there. I'm just asking if the same profitability is there with each vehicle in year one.
I think I maybe can answer that. So from an aftermarket perspective, it really kind of depends on what you're putting in it. So it's just like the half-ton trucks can be the biggest component or the biggest winner in the 12-month replacement plan. So on a half-ton truck, you're usually not putting more than toolboxes, again, ladder rack, bed liner, I hope. Whereas if you're talking about like an F-550 and you've got $20,000, $30,000 in the bed and the service body, maybe a crane or a dump or something of that nature, we're gonna recommend a different plan for that. Because while that vehicle is worth a fortune when it's 12 months old, then we have to figure out, okay, do we swap the equipment, do we acquire new equipment, and that changes the math a little bit. So the larger vehicles would be more towards the 5-year end of the hold, and then the simple like SUVs, half-ton trucks, those make a lot of sense for the 12-month mark. Does that answer your question?
Aaron, what's the value of the current vehicles that we would be giving up?
When we first looked at this, we had looked at replacing 20 vehicles in the first year. So you can see that is actually a little fewer vehicles just because there's some growth in there. And based on the age and miles of those units, keep in mind those are your oldest vehicles. The average per vehicle was about $4,000. So you can take that number and then extrapolate it over if you do 15 or if you do 20. So
Say that again, the average value is,
about $4,000 for your current, those are your absolute oldest vehicles, like the ones from the 90s.
well, I just see up there, you got four Ford Mavericks, of which we just purchased four Ford Mavericks.
Those are the growth vehicles.
Yeah.
So those aren't replacing Mavericks, those are adding Mavericks to the fleet.
Oh, okay. So does this change any of our insurance issues, anything of that sort? Since they're leased vehicles?
In my experience, it shouldn't. You all would know better, but we work with a lot of agencies that are part of a co-op or a JPA or something of that nature, and it shouldn't impact your insurance. I've not seen that it has, but again,
I would imagine it would improve our rates because newer vehicles are safer. And so I know for my personal vehicles, newer vehicles cost less, even though they cost more money wise because they're safer. And so if I were to extrapolate, that would also carry over for the city fleet being newer and safer, having less risk if they're involved in a collision. I do have a question. I don't know who can answer this. So with our police vehicles, there's a set package like, hey, we're going to put light, siren, whatever onto it. And as was referenced earlier about either public works or parks, if we have a set amount, do we know what that amount would be for the base of the vehicles that we would use for the ones that we have for, say, public works or parks, or is that like to be determined?
You're asking how much it costs to put equipment in the cars?
No, I'm not talking police. I'm talking just packages like with police. We know what the set things are that go into a vehicle, and you guys give us that information. We have a dollar amount that says, hey, this is the vehicle and then the equipment that goes with that. For public works and for parks, there's also going to be set things that we need to put on there, ladder racks or whatever. Are there set types of vehicle configurations that we have? And if we have a dollar amount that we can kind of get an idea how much more above and beyond the lease rate that we're looking at that to make those vehicles maximally useful for you guys?
Yes, and I can bring that back to you. We have done some of that analysis already. It has in the past not been necessarily consistent, but it is our goal to, as Gene said, to have a consistent package. Every Parks vehicle gets a headache rack, a toolbox, and a bed liner, for instance. So that's the idea. In terms of cost, it ranges under $5,000 generally for that type of upfitting. And then it goes up from there. If you start outfitting an F-550, it can go up to $30,000.
I think of it.
Does that get
Sorry,
close?
if I could, for the purpose of today, the everything Aaron said is 100% accurate. Gene's point earlier on the uniformity was spot on. We did account for a ballpark upfit cost on the vehicles that we think will have equipment. So like, for example, and I know you probably can't see it, but the top line on there is a 1-ton truck. And we're estimating that would have about $3,500 of equipment. So that'll get you, again, some of the things Aaron mentioned, like heading drive or toolbox, something like that. So it's pretty light equipment, that's not a surface body. But then if you go down to the 4th line from the bottom, that's a 5,500 chassis. And we're assuming that would have a full surface body on the back. So we put $10,000 and that's included in the lease cost already. So you can actually essentially finance that through the lease if you choose.
So those numbers are included in what you're showing us?
Yes, sir. Yeah. And certainly as we work through the specs, that could go up, it could go down, it could apply to some, not others. I mean, we would get deeper in that if this were approved, but we did assume some expense.
We talked about using other cities' specs, so we wouldn't create them ourselves. If it's a city of Sultan, for example, that's in the program. We grab their specs, if it works, great. We got their 150 specs, we don't create the wheel, we know the cost, we find a local vendor and approve it.
Aaron, with the potential merger of the sewer district, there was talk about when that equipment joins the city that we would need an additional mechanic. If we went with the maintenance schedule that Enterprise is proposing for the, I guess you'd call them commercial vehicles, not the heavy duty stuff, would we need that extra person?
I think that it's a difficult question to answer right now, but I do think that I know that it will reduce the burden on our mechanic we have at the moment. And so without having their list of equipment in front of me, it's hard to say, but it certainly helps.
Anya, as part of their sewer manpower, did they have a mechanic? Do they have a mechanic over there currently?
No, I don't believe so.
Yeah. Okay.
And again, this maintenance is on the light duty vehicles that
Right.
Enterprise. So you still got all the dump trucks, the backhoes and excavators, all that equipment is still going to be done.
But our mechanic now is servicing the light duty vehicles.
Correct.
Right.
Exactly.
So you'd alleviate 40 some vehicles from that work.
Well, it's a massive workload for one person.
Right.
I can't imagine 81 vehicles, a piece of equipment that one guy's responsible for. That seems outrageous.
Yeah, it helps overcome problems like we had last snow season when we had some stuff that wasn't maintenance because we just didn't have time for it.
Yeah.
But this would free up that time.
So Laura, what is the total dollar value of your contracts in Washington that you have with,
I don't even think I could guess an answer to that.
Okay, I just for my curiosity, I was wondering like what percentage, just to kind of give me an idea of what that looks like.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
it's 60 accounts, so this would be 61 if we won.
yeah, each partnership is in a different place in its tenure, and naturally, the goal is that we provide the value that I'm telling you we're going to, and then every year you add vehicles to the program, so the value, if you will, grows. That said, also they're varying in sizes. Like we work with counties, we work with special districts, so some of our partnerships have several hundred vehicles, and some have as few as 20. So I don't know that exact number off the top of my head. It's a really interesting question I've never been asked before, but I can get that number for you by the end of the week. Pretty easily.
Okay.
Come up with any additional questions, can we email you?
Of course.
I saw your contact information on the slideshow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And the
Thank
spreadsheet
you.
analysis that Aaron was showing up there, I know is really small, that has to do with every piece of equipment except for like little push lawnmowers, weed eaters, chainsaws. Those are, in our mind, are disposable items. But it addressed all your figure mowers, everything that we have. So that's a complete analysis.
Aaron, I got one more question. This has to do with the difference between our light vehicles and our heavy equipment. Do the light vehicles that we currently have more miles per year than the heavy duty equipment?
Except for the dump truck.
Well, I don't think the dump truck does that many miles per year. but
Truck was run by Fred Flintstone.
That must have been here when Lynn Walty was mayor or something. I don't know. I'm just thinking that do the light vehicles, are they operated more miles per year than our large equipment like the dump truck or Vector trucks or those kinds of things? Or do we even have that information?
Of course I do. I have all of the mileage for every vehicle. On average, the light duty trucks have 45,000 miles on them right now. And on average, the equipment, heavier duty trucks have 53,000 miles on them.
No, I get the average, but what about the annual? What I'm
amount?
looking at is the light vehicles, are they run more miles per year
Yes.
than the
The answer
heavy
is
equipment
yes.
is run?
Yes, they're a newer vehicle and they have a similar amount of miles. So yes.
Okay.
Hey, Laura, one last question before I know you're, so is there an option for heavy equipment vehicles over the 26, you only go up to 26,000?
Yeah, we only go up to 20.
So do you have a division that, or are there plans for anything heavier than that, or that's your sweet spot is
But
26,000?
that includes dump truck, right?
Essentially, it includes dump trucks. I don't know if it includes your. dump
If it's
truck.
weight rating, I mean, depends on the size of the dump truck.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm not under the impression that that's a conversation that corporate office is having. However, we didn't do police vehicles until 5 years ago. So certainly we're always taking suggestions from customers and there's a possibility to do at least in the future, but I wouldn't bet on the near future.
Okay, thank you.
Can I answer one more question I didn't answer, which is the dump truck is a 2007 and we bought it used.
Nothing wrong with that truck.
It's a good truck.
Yeah, it's a good truck. Well,
All right, thank you. Aaron, so I know that
Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, thank you all.
information was supposed to be available. Kelly, was that information that was provided tonight, was that supposed to be available in the packet?
Not this presentation, but Aaron's gonna email it to me in just a few minutes, and
Okay.
I'll get it to you guys. But
Awesome.
there is a staff report though that he had included about the vehicles that we have now and a little further details. So take
Okay.
a look at that.
Yeah, that'd be very helpful. And
Yeah.
yeah, that excellent job, Aaron. That was really helpful and a good analysis of kind of where we're at. And I'm encouraged by the lease option that we have. I mean, I'm just thinking from a practical standpoint of your staff going out and having to pick between which vehicle I have today, similar to what the police officers go to, like, hey, am I getting the old crappy car? Or am I getting the one that's actually got the right equipment on it and it's configured correctly so they can be more efficient with their time and just make good use of our resources. So for me, I want to make sure that it's a financially responsible decision and also provides maximum flexibility for you and for your staff and that they can be just efficient with what they're doing. So any other questions or comments for Director Albertson? All right, Sarah, you're back up for part 2.
All
Parks
right.
Department update.
Parks and Recreation Department update. In your packets, you will find that we do now have our first draft of our parks and amenities list, and it's ready for review. On this list, you're going to find that it is 2 pages. We included what we know currently as the park names, their location, and if they are owned by the city, and also a column for if they are managed by the city. We did that because there are some locations managed by parks that we don't own, such as the North Cove Boat Launch. And there are also locations that we own but don't manage. A lot of those came from HOA agreements over time. And so this helped break down so that when we get calls in the future about a property not being maintained properly, we can easily reference the chart and say, here's who you call instead. so that we aren't doing that research every time. I also did include nearby county parks just because they're often confused as city parks and may eventually, like Cavallaro, be one that we're trying to obtain. And this is not a finalized list, so please, if you see anything on here that you have questions about, ask them. We aim to make this complete over the next couple of weeks, but it is going to take time. The amenity check boxes across to inventory, if it has a restroom or a picnic table, that'll really be solidified as we do all of our park walkthroughs and inspections, which we're slated to begin this week, but one of my key employees is out who needs to be a part of that. So it will probably domino back into next week. As we do all of our park inspections, we're going to be making all-inclusive lists of anything and everything that we see that needs attention in the park, whether it's something simple like removing staples and painting something, or an ADA fix that needs to be done in the future, or larger capital improvements. Once we have all of that done for all the parks, we're going to do a huge priority list and sort it and break it into biteable years. Mainly priorities for me will always fall with safety and with accessibility, as well as park usability. And then it has to be paired with available budget as well as we continue. So when we have that, we'll have a much better outlook as to what our next 5 years look like, and that will be used to build the eventual 5-year plan. In the top very left of the 2-page document, it says click here for a map. That is a map available on the Lake Stevens website, lakestevenswa.gov. It is a new GIS map that was released. We will be making edits to that, but I didn't just want to start sending one-off edits over to our IT department. I wanted to bundle them up and make it really efficient to change them. That way it'll be easier for the public to understand what parks we actually do manage, and update all of the information we provide on those pages. Going from that 5-year plan, which we are starting to chip away with, there's many other pieces that we are working on in the background of parks, although they're really just a lot of drafts and bits and pieces. They're not stuff that are readily available now for me to produce for public eyes. That does include our future maintenance and operations management, or management standards. Those will really have measurable standards. They make guiding decisions about how we maintain parks and how we operate them. So that'll come out with, how short does grass get cut? How tall does it grow before it gets cut? And that will be able to be built into day-to-day decisions on where we send people in order to do all of our maintenance. For a yearly maintenance schedule, we'll have higher categories that span over a year calendar to show you when you're in the 4th week of April, what are you doing? Are you pressure washing the shelters at that time? Are you unwinterizing your irrigation? And of course, that can change based on what the weather's actually doing. If we anticipate another hard freeze in the near future, then we'll delay those schedules. But that is our plan for rolling out all of the different standards and policies for the department. In the background, we've also started to look at the city's municipal code for parks. We've looked at parks rules, policies, and procedures, everything that's available to the public and on our back end, and have started red pinning things and identifying what we need to look into for new wording, for making sure that all of our documents are in sync and nothing's contradicting each other. And we're just slowly chipping away as staff time's available for that. Does anybody have questions about any of the broad topics I talked about tonight, or the specific list in front of you for the parks and amenities draft?
Well, Sarah, will a staffing needs assessment, I guess, be part of that?
Absolutely. So once we know exactly how many acres of grass that we cut, or trails that we manage, or beds of flowers, we can quickly start computing that into staff time. Once we know how many staff hours it takes within a week or a month, or to even just do a one-time routine on our entire system, you can start building into what does that look like for a 40-hour-a-week employee. So I think for me, I have to build those foundation blocks in order to make really, strategic decisions and make them correctly, instead of just throwing 2 or 3 more staff at it too early. I think there's a lot of moves we're going to be able to do in the Parks Department where we ensure that our staff is properly equipped and have the correct knowledge in order to make us as efficient and effective as possible. So
I think part of that, Gary, is you're talking just regular maintenance, but I think that there's also an initial getting up to standards, our right?
Yeah,
We need to
yeah.
make sure we're calculating as well.
Right. But to have the adequate resources to carry out your plan also.
Yeah.
That we put a huge emphasis on our parks and want to maintain them
Yeah.
to a
absolutely.
level.
So Sarah, are you suggesting that the information that you're trying to obtain that was not already provided to you when you came on? I mean, did we not have an inventory of the acreage and like who owned what? I mean, was there not any of that information provided to you when you came on?
Not all in one document in this way. And so a lot of what our staff is doing is now that our admin staff is in the same department as the field staff, we can have those conversations where the information is more freely doing. So a lot of information was just knowledge. Like Kyle, one of our long-term maintenance staff, has in his head about when he puts down fertilizer, when he puts down pre-emergence, what brands he's using. So we're documenting all that on paper with things like the amount of acreage and addresses. This list, everything on that GIS map, I think it was completed and pushed to the public in week 2 of my being here. And so they were working all these things. We just didn't have that information all in one spot. So it was opening documents, checking to make sure they're still accurate now, and also going through the back end agreement. So on many of these, like with the HOA questions, I'm saying, okay, this location, pull the documents and on the deeds and on the agreements that we have, where is that piece of paper? And is it how we're practicing right now? And if not, is it how it should be? And so we're having all those conversations to try to make notes and start going through things one at a time.
The good thing about it is as we vet out the view works in GIS, that can all be captured what you're talking about in one spot. So there's no, where's that information at? It's all on that GIS view works asset management program.
So Sarah, part of the hours used to keep things up and do projects and things like that, one of the things I think we need to keep in mind is we have a strong volunteer base in Lake Stevens. And I think that you could prioritize some of those projects for volunteers, such as Youth Advisory Council. You could use the Rotary Club does a lot of stuff in the parks. And there's a bunch of others that do the same thing. There's schools and scouts and all kinds of things that have. So I think if you had an availability list of those projects as you're going through this, so we can get those farmed out to the right people, that might help us on some of the hours our staff have to work on that stuff.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point and is something we've already spoke on the back end about. So the newest staff on our admin side is Jessica, and she was assigned that exact task about a month ago with a lot of other tasks. And so she just set a meeting for next week where we're going to sit down with the field crew and admin to say in November, what volunteer jobs are available in spring. And so we'll have things like, trail maintenance, helping with vegetation, picking up loose trash, painting benches, whatever that looks like, so that when we can partner with different organizations, whether we contact them or they contact us, we say, hey, these are the things we're looking to accomplish in the next 60 days. How would you like to support?
Yeah, Jill probably has a pretty good list of people that she can rely on.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments?
Yeah, just a quick comment, Sarah. I really appreciate the attention to detail that you're placing on getting the information organized and coming up with a thoughtful plan on how you're going to approach management of the parks and development. So keep up the good work.
Thank you.
If I could add, this analysis is a lot bigger than just the parks. Aaron and Sarah have been looking at all facilities, roadside mowing, for example, the center strips, all of that stuff's being looked at and divvied up in the department. Now, there's a public education component that's going to come to this to council later and see that go out to the public with this time. That per city code, if there's improvements to the frontage of the right of way, meaning like a landscape strip is installed or sidewalk, it's the property owner's responsibility to mow that. So if you drive up 20th Street Southeast, for example, it's a mess in a lot of places, and we've brought people in to help with that. But the reality is it's property owner's responsibility to maintain that because the city invested in curb gutter and sidewalk and the planter strip there. It's therefore the property owner's responsibility. Most people don't know that, and that's with ice and snow, everything. So we're gonna work on that as well, but it's baby steps, right? And we'll get there, but just so you know, this is a full analysis of everything that we're maintaining, including the parks this year.
So on that map, for example, you'll have all the areas that show, hey, this is, you know, property owner, city. I mean, so someone can look and say, hey, I've got a concern, because we hear a lot of complaints. I hear complaints pretty much every week about maintenance issues in the city for those areas you described. And so if they could just say, hey, here's the map on the city website. I don't know if this is city maintained. Instead of calling City Hall, they can just go online and look and say, hey, this, whoops, my neighbor should be maintaining this, not the city. Or the HOA or whoever is responsible for that.
Correct, and that is our goal, and you'll see some places like Lundy Parkway, for example. The city can only maintain the city right of way. So if you go outside of that, we can't do that, it's private property. So we maintain that, and you might see side slopes or something else that's part of an HOA or it's private property. That's their responsibility outside the right of way. So if you see that difference in maintenance levels, that's why it's like that.
Yeah, so that information, just if it's communicated, it's noted, then people have an idea of who's responsible for that, and it can be addressed appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. And reaching out to those HOAs, property owners, and that education component will happen as we go through this.
Right. Thank you, Sarah, for that. So do we have a timeline for these, for the updates for what our two directors are working on with the Parks and Public Works, as far as when we're going to get this final analysis for the parks and for the right of ways and such? I guess one other piece too, that's, I don't know who stormwater is responsible for the retention ponds. I know we had a presentation on that, and that kind of, I haven't heard much since then, but I know we have, we're responsible for maintenance of those areas too. And there was discussion of us taking on all of those in the city. And so where that fits in the piece and where we're at as far as, you know, that would be helpful to have that information globally with all this information that's coming at us together.
Yeah, we can do that. The stormwater, we should probably update on it. I know we've been cleaning quite a few of them with our new really cool slow blower. Yeah.
I just saw one in the community. I saw a stormwater sign that said, hey, this is, that was city that was posted that I hadn't seen before. So someone from the city's coming and noted that it was completely overgrown. So I don't know if it's city or HOA responsible, but I did see that's something that I've noticed recently.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah.
I will say that the storm team is fully staffed now. And so each one of those positions has been filled. And so they're out doing things. You're going to see more ponds being cleaned, more basins being cleaned, these things on ponds, these forms on ponds, encouraging homeowners to maintain them. I think we are getting to the point where we're ready to come back to council. We have a robust inventory and discuss options, kind of like we did tonight with Fleet. Scenarios for maintenance of ponds, whether or not the city takes them all on or we continue down the road we've been on.
And just one last piece I want to add to that. So the inmate crews that we've had historically that have helped in the city, I've watched and I see a lot of really good work that's performed by these individuals. And I don't know how well it's being communicated that there's a need for these men to perform work and to be out and doing things instead of hanging out and playing cards and watching TV. You know, and so I can know that I've talked to many that express interest in wanting to do that. And some say that, hey, there's not a need in the cities. And I'm like, we've got a massive need in our city. We could probably use 2 crews full time in Lake Stevens. So anything that we can do to, I think it's a mutually beneficial relationship. It provides, you know, like I said, meaningful opportunity for the incarcerated folks and also provides value for the taxpayers. And so if there's any way we can utilize them, I appreciate if we could give that consideration.
Sure.
All right, Mayor Gailey, budget discussion for 2023.
Yeah, Barb.
Share my screen.
So we are going to go over the mayor's proposed budget today. So Mayor Gailey, feel free to jump in as we go through this. We did kind of do a walkthrough this morning and have changed up a few things, hence not getting this into your packet. I know Clerk Chilling just emailed this out to you, so you do have it, and it is has been posted online as well. So it is there for the public. So as we normally start our 2023 budget calendar, the next week we are going to have a budget discussion, and I will be bringing forward the capital project list. This list is based on the CIP that Director Halverson has brought back previously. So it will show just the 2023 budgeted items and nothing beyond that. So we don't actually budget further than that. And then we can have a budget discussion on the 1st if we needed, and then public hearings start on the 8th. So looking at our 2023 budget priorities, we did just sort of move these around a little bit. Councilman Frederickson had mentioned the maintaining the public health and safety, and how that kind of is more of a, not just safety of, public of the professional safety police, that sort of thing. And so we kind of actually just dropped a number of our items underneath that heading, as it makes a lot of sense. We're doing the APWA for public health and safety, enhancing transportation, parks. All of these things do run in underneath that public health and safety priority. So we just sort of moved them around a little bit just to sort of focus on that a bit. Close this. Okay, so into our first area, we have had a lot of discussions about cost of living and the salary survey. This is just showing what the recommendation is. So the mayor's recommendation is the 8.6% cost of living. The rationale is that city has been doing this 90% of CPIW. We've kept up with that average since 2009. The estimated total cost on this over all of the funds is approximately $510,000. And then the overall effect by fund, we have broken down. As you can see, the majority of our salaries and benefits are in the general fund. And so that does take the majority of it. We do estimate about 21% of the total to be reimbursed by the permit funds, just based on the related work that the different staff do who are allocated to general street and stormwater. They perform permit related work, and those funds get back into that fund from that restricted fund. So this is good for retention and recruiting. And then we did look at a number of the competitive or comparable cities. And there's a couple of our comparable cities that are actually recommending the full CPIW, CPIU. The CPIW is 9.5% and the CPIU is 10.1. And then we have a number of other cities that are recommending somewhere between 6 and 8%. And then a couple of them are also doing salary surveys and are looking to be at the top third or top quarter, sort of like our council had suggested being in the 60, 70th percentile, 75th, so that they're looking at those as well. And then mentioning.
Can you go back
Yep.
just a second? So the mayor's recommendation is 8.6% COLA in addition to the 60th percentile based on years in service.
Yes, and that's in the
And
next.
that estimated total cost is for both of those?
No, that is just for the cost of living.
Just 510 is just the COLA.
Just the COLA. And then this one actually shows what utilizing the 60th percentile for the market rate and years in position method is an additional $467,000. And that does include that what was presented originally to council was just the salary increases. This also includes the 20% benefit cost as well as the 8.6% COLA on that. And so we have it broken down by general fund, permit, street, and stormwater fund for you. So it's that additional $276,000 to the general fund. We have actually in here, it basically says we have some minor adjustments that may need to be done during implementation. Up until this point, Director Warrington has been working on positions only, not individual staff. And so now we're looking at compression rates from the staff who is being supervised by the supervisor and where they are. We like to keep a 5 to 10% average between the supervisors and those they actually supervise. And it doesn't seem that it's going to affect more than one or two positions, but that position, that percent position would just go up one step to just to maintain that percentage difference. And that just happens if someone who is being supervised has been here for more than 7 years, they would be at the highest step. If the supervisor is brand new, they would go to the lowest step on that range. And so that's the only time that happens. We do also want to recommend committing to doing non-represented market rate studies every 3 years. We do these regularly for the represented staff, and we haven't done one in so long. That's why we have such a huge increase this year. And so we're definitely out of range here. Kind of looking into allocated requests. This just looks at all of the staffing requests.
So one of my thoughts on this is we've spent the last 4 or 5 years building a really good team, really quality skilled team, and we need to keep them so that we don't have continual turnover in employees. And I think if we're not being competitive wage wise, then we lose. Then we have the potential to start losing some quality folks. I know it's a big chunk of money, but I think that's because this hasn't been done in quite a while. So my hopes is you would back this so that we can maintain the quality team that we put together.
Moving on to the allocated requests, this just allocates based on department, and this is just a summary overview of the staffing requests, item and equipment. I don't go into a lot of detail on your item and equipment requests based on council's desire to allow department heads a little bit more freedom in what they're actually purchasing from their budgets. So I didn't think presenting each piece of equipment is really beneficial at this point. So I do kind of go into it a little bit of where that's coming from and how those allocate out, but I didn't go into a lot of detail on that. This is the position requests. I know those have been brought forward to you during the strategic staffing. So this is kind of everything put into one place as to what was requested and summarized by department. So I'll kind of start in detail with the Parks Department. You heard Director Garceau going over what her plans are. There isn't a lot of requests in the Parks Department, and as she had mentioned, she wants to get a real understanding of the department and the needs before, asking for staffing. We may need to come back next year and ask for some, additional, whether that's additional seasonals or whatever that is. She's definitely looking at all of the equipment needs as well as the staffing needs. So we did add a $75,000 placeholder for equipment needs, depending on whatever it is that she feels that she might need, whether that's a large mower or trailers or whatever that is. So we do have that in a placeholder in the budget. We do also have the park ranger in there. That has been in the strategic staffing plan for quite a while. The vehicle would come through the fleet program. So we have included the fleet program in this budget recommendation at this point. The recommendation for the current year would be to get 10 vehicles and replace 5 of them. So we'd be adding 5 vehicles this year. So that's the current fleet plan for 2023. Additionally, like I've mentioned, there is an additional seasonal park worker included in the budget. Currently, there are 2 included in the base budget, so this would add a 3rd. And
You're
then
recommending a park ranger?
Correct.
It's on your budget.
Correct.
we were thinking of holding that one off until next year. There is some.
I didn't ask anything else. I just asked if you're recommending a park ranger.
Okay, so basically, I just wanted to kind of mention that the parks budget, it does receive an allocation of some of the public works positions and some of the projects. And so the actual parks requests are $144,000 for the staffing, but the overall going into the parks department with the shared public works staff is a little over 200,000. Same with the equipment replacement. there are some things that are being added to the public works budget that, because they share space and staff, increase that budget as well. So looking into the parks, or the public works department, it has been recommended to include a public works analyst. This is a high-level program manager. We'll be working on SOPs, contracts, grants, maintaining accreditation once that is actually acquired, doing analysis of VWorks, doing the large analysis that Aaron, Director Halverson had just done over the last few days for fleet management. That a lot of the reporting and analyzing that would need to be done. Also budget creation and reporting from VWorks. Additionally, the shop quartermaster, there are some higher initial setup costs on that program. So this would create efficiencies and reduce costs and eliminate unnecessary supply runs. So this person would be basically in charge of the public works shop, and they would, the upfront costs would include things like locked cabinets, shelves, 20 rain heads, sprinklers, all the things. And so we did put aside about $100,000 for shop quartermaster setup costs. We did some analysis on time spent by staff going to Ace Hardware and Grainger and Lowe's and Home Depot, picking up daily tools and things. And this will definitely create a lot of efficiencies in the department just with staff time and one-off runs. So, and I know the directors are attempting to do more shopping online from Lowe's and Home Depot and Amazon versus actually going into the stores. So that will definitely help. As I mentioned, some additional budget recommendations. There's about $725,000 in capital equipment, and I call it capital equipment. There are a few things in there that are more capital facilities, including, again, Director Halverson did this all by scoring matrix and priority scoring. And a few of the things that are in there include cover for the decant facility, covers for the fuel, covers for the materials, the sand, those types of things, which actually help with the stormwater and so we don't lose product. And so there are some capital projects that are also included in that, but there's about $500,000 in director allocation. So we didn't want to set exactly what it is he can use this funding on, but the mayor and city administrator to go through the list and say, yes, okay, those dollars make sense. This is about the same amount as was put aside last year for equipment and things. So felt that was actually a good dollar amount. So then I break it down again. Like I said, this is actually broken out: general government, parks department, street and storm. And so I kind of break it out by the department, and you can see the majority is, as I mentioned, stormwater, just because of the decant facility and some of these bigger projects that are going on there. And all of these are, so in that shop quartermaster is also shared with parks department as well. Oh, and I did want to mention, I know there was a question about potentially putting some funding aside for roadside maintenance contracts, including just as a placeholder, and that is in the street fund. So we do have some funding put aside in their base recommendations.
Just a quick question. What is the $500,000 director allocation?
That's the rest of that $725,000 that we put aside. So it's everything, that's all the equipment purchases. And we can give you a detailed list of that. I just wasn't sure if you were.
That's okay. It's helpful to know.
I'm sure Director Halverson can run some off the top of his head for you, but.
Would this include the vehicles that we're?
So we put aside $95,000 for the fleet program in year one, and that's for the 10 vehicles. I know she had mentioned 20 vehicles. That is not the information that we were given for this budget period for 2023. 2023, it was $95,000 for those 10 vehicles. And then it's going to be a different cost next year. Average, we're going to be putting, as he mentioned, it's about $200,000 a year for the fleet program, and then additional for the equipment replacement that Director Halverson and I spoke about it a little bit today regarding what department each of those things come from, because some of the most expensive equipment is stormwater equipment, Vector trucks and sweepers and that sort of thing. And so we need to determine the allocation going into that replacement fund. And so we're actually working on those, but unless Director Halverson has something different to say, I believe it's the $95,000 for the first year.
I think that's accurate, Barb. I have so many numbers in my head. I'm sorry. I was up at 4:30 this morning thinking about fleet, so.
I thought she showed a higher.
She did. She showed 21 vehicles or whatever.
15 is 22, 15 current and 7 for future.
Yeah.
Right, but that doesn't match this.
No, it doesn't.
So we're going to bring back
What is the game plan, I
a
guess?
proposal for that.
She took the old proposal, we looked at this last year, and so she took that old proposal based on the information she was given and gave it to us. We've since distilled that down to what's affordable in relationship to all the other needs we have outside the enterprise program. So what she showed was accurate. If we were gonna do 20 vehicles, problem is it takes $200,000 to do that. We don't feel we have that money next year to balance the budget, the mayor's budget. So we propose to spool that back, do 10 vehicles next year, use the other 100,000 to buy other equipment. That's the difference between what she showed and what we're showing.
So the 10 less vehicles would be roughly 95,000 versus the 200,000. Is that what we're saying?
That's correct.
She was just showing what their program could produce. It's our choice to do 20 vehicles or 10 vehicles. We've only got so much money. We chose to do 10 vehicles next year, use the other $95,000 or $100,000 to get other equipment.
The other equipment being more capital vehicles or hardware type
Mower,
stuff.
it could be all, who knows?
The
Replacement
dump
backhoe,
truck.
whatever's on our list.
Yeah, and I can tell you what those things are if you're interested. One is a hot box for the roll-off truck that we bought this year, and a hot box allows us to buy hot asphalt and patch potholes efficiently. Keeps the asphalt hot. It's a useful tool for us. There are plow blades in there for vehicles that we have. We can add some plows to our fleet. There are covers for materials bins. For instance, our salt pile is not covered right now. And so when it rains, salt dissolves. So we're losing material. And the same at the decant facility. Our materials bins are not covered. So we're paying to dispose of what should be dry decant waste at wet rates. And it's all based on weight. So I think several of these things are improvements in service in terms of emergency response, but also several things are going to save us some operational costs.
Okay, any other questions on that piece?
Not necessarily on that piece. So I'm just looking at the sustainability of these funds, just for the overall budget, these pots of money, the permit funds. I look at our billable lands report and talking to folks in the community that build and do things in the community, and there's not really a whole lot of space left. So as far as permits, I'm wondering what the viability of that fund, and then the street fund, if that's also comes from, building fees, or when someone pays, X amount per permit for that. Stormwater, I know, comes out of your property tax. So that's more of a solid fund, sustainable fund. But the other two seem like there's a lot more variability, and as permits continue to go down, that those funds will diminish, and at some point they'll zero out.
So the stormwater fund has its own fees, and so it is a proprietary fund. You went and we did a rate study recently in 2018, and so our rates are set for the next couple of years. We'll do another rate study at that point based on the projects that are needed, et cetera. The street fund, it's not based on building. The street fund is property tax. 27% of the property tax that we bring into the city goes into the street fund to help fund that, as well as motor vehicle fuel tax. Motor vehicle fuel tax did actually go up this year. Interestingly, they actually provided some additional motor vehicle fuel tax, some transportation tax. And then we did look at reallocation of salaries and benefits of the positions based on Parks Department being created. And so we those positions have now been moved into parks, and then now the street and stormwater people aren't being charged to parks. And then the people who were being charged to streets are now allocated out, whether it's to facilities, which is actually general government. So it does touch your government, your general fund as well. The permit fund, Director Wright can speak more about that, but we do have a bit of a surplus in the permit fund, just because we, as my take is, we do a lot with a little. So we have been, fairly understaffed, as our developers in the city would, know over the past few years. We have finally built that up and are staffed. And so those funds are being utilized, but we are actually doing the work of that permit. So as long as there's permit work to be done, there's generally funding for that.
And I would just add one sort of comment that the types of permits we're seeing, we're not going to see a lot of raw land development, but we will continue, and we are seeing, as a more mature city, redevelopment of commercial spaces, tenant improvements, new housing stock remodels. So we are continuing to see steady stream of permits coming in. Just the type is changing, not just raw plats. And even with plats, we know we still have pretty substantial plats that we'll be seeing over the next probably 10 years, slowed down from the pace we've been at, but there still is quite a bit of stock with the recently annexed areas. So we will continue to see permit revenue coming in, just a slightly different type of permits.
In terms of overall number projection, where do we stand? I mean, will we increase the number that we're taking? Will it be the same, or will we be reducing? And if so, by how much?
We estimate reductions. I don't have that in front of me.
I think it would be good to get a number on that. Right, I think that's where you're going.
Yeah, because I'm just looking at the budget and the implications. I'm looking at the compounding effect of these asks. And so if that's the largest other than general fund, I just want to make sure that it's a sustainable option for us to continue funding.
And the permit, I know the permit funds are difficult to get a really good, accurate forecast on. We get one every year, and then they're a little off, whether people are pushing out the permit, pushing out the building until the next year. I believe Carol has been working on some of this.
She has, and our projections were a little ahead of pace from what we projected this year. Last year, we were a little bit behind pace. So it does vary. I would expect, I'll be talking to the other planning and community development directors in the county later this week, and sort of getting their take on where they see it in their cities with some of the uncertainties in the economy right now. So that conservative.
Thank you.
Okay, looking at the administrative department, there were a number of staffing requests. There was a couple from IT. One that has been recommended is the IT application analyst. This person will actually be doing a number of things. One is the setup of ViewWorks. I know that's a huge portion of what we're looking at getting done with. We added funding to purchase ViewWorks last year and to upgrade it and to expand it. And we need somebody to actually implement ViewWorks. This person will actually also be helping to do the transition from Laserfiche into SharePoint, which is for our records management. This person is actually, since the first couple of years, are really going to be working on ViewWorks. We have them allocated more to the public works funds, and then less to the general fund, but there is an allocation to the general fund as well. Interns, this was actually a program I believe Director Warrington had mentioned during our staffing plan, that we're looking at doing an internship program, a paid internship program, but we have not put any actual funding to it. So We're thinking this can actually be paid through salary savings if there's vacancies for the year. And then we can look at those different departments. Passport clerks, I just want to put in here, we did remove those from the 2023 budget, and we'll revisit this when we have some building space. So that takes out the 2 part-time positions that were approved in 2022. And then another future position consideration that we discussed was the public records clerk within the city clerk's office. It wasn't part of a request, but as you know, public records requests take an exorbitant amount of time. We have a lot of them. Something that we're kind of holding off on request, waiting on the sewer assumption timeline, as we will assume we will be taking over a number of staff that we might be able to slide into that position. One thing we are considering is one of the part-time office assistants, making them full-time and giving them projects to work on, which would be public records requests, assisting in the planning department with some of the administrative assistant work, some of those things. So it would be a lesser cost than adding another part-time person because this person already receives medical and benefits. So so the overall effect of the additional recommendations, about 426,000. So we have a couple of placeholders in here for that are related to the sewer assumption. One, we have talked about doing moving to Cassell from Springbrook. And so we do have that in here as a placeholder. And then also we have a $300,000 placeholder for sewer assumption. I'm not 100% sure what this is for, but we put a placeholder aside just in case the city needs to help to fund some of these items. Maybe the mayor can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, you know, as part of the assumption, I think we're gonna run into some costs. We don't know whether that's, you know, hiring the consultant to help do the merger, if there's a position that we need to worry about. So the 300,000 is there, whatever cost might come up with that assumption.
How far are we from that, though? I don't even know the rate.
Then we won't spend that 300,000.
Placeholder.
Yeah.
And there was
We'll know
discussion.
more Next week.
Yeah.
And right now we have those placeholders coming out of the pandemic recovery funds. So they're not actually hitting the general fund. And then I did want to mention that we do have the $20,000 in there for the senior center contribution for 2023. So we have put it into the recommendation. So that is in there as well. Planning department, a couple of recommendations. Our current 60% part-time senior planner has been with us for a number of years. I would like to go back to full-time. So we do have that in the budget. And then a promotional opportunity from a senior planner to a principal lead planner. We do have this pushed out to about fourth quarter. We do actually have two senior planners. This is just a promotional opportunity. They would have to apply for it, et cetera. We want to make sure we have those internal opportunities. And then, as I mentioned, one of the requests was for an administrative assistant in the department. And again, we're sort of holding for the sewer assumption. And then again, that part-time office assistant could help with that project, those projects as well. I did want to mention that we have the 91st Streetscape Planning and Design in the budget. And I think that was the only additional item that was requested. And then we have the police department. So we have the police officers, the council director for the 2 additional police officers. Mayor's recommendation is fill the 6 current vacancies, and then when the officers are available, go ahead and hire them, and then we would add them to the budget amendment.
Yeah, so following up on the conversation we had last week or the week before about adding 2 more positions, we can do that, but it just messes up our graph on something that probably is not going to happen. But if we have 8 fully qualified, ready to go, hard charging police officers, we'll bring it back to you, and we'll hire them up. But to add those 2 really skews our, what is it, $2 million?
$2 million over 6 years.
4 years, right? So.
Yeah, but if it happens, it's gonna skew it anyway, right?
It's gonna skew it anyway. But let's hope it happens, because I'd like to add more officers. But let's fill the 6 we have now and then we can add more to the org chart.
Well, I don't have a problem with that as long as we're looking forward to saying, hey, if we get 2 more, we get 2 more.
Absolutely.
I don't want to say, well, we budgeted for the 6 we have vacant and not go forward with the 2 we, if the council has told you we won't.
Yeah, yeah.
The mayor's have said that if we find 10, we'll go,
I'll
we'll
take-
go ahead and come back.
I'll take 10.
I mean,
Another,
I understand the fact that, you know, we're not coming up with anybody, but if we don't, if we're not even open to that opportunity, if it does arise,
right,
so we don't want to cut off the opportunity is what I'm saying.
Well, I don't, the only people who wouldn't know there was, how would I say this? The only people who wouldn't know there's, anyway. The chief knows if you got 8 guys that show up and they're all fully qualified when we hire them, we're coming back to you for 2 more slots.
All right.
we are looking at some potential attrition too, so we'll have to be still working to fill additional positions, so.
Correct. I get it.
And then the other request was for the police record specialist, working with the body cam stuff. The recommendation is to evaluate the actual need after 3rd quarter. They have done a great job on their statistics in looking at what they expect to occur. The idea is to bring back the analysis of the actuals and then request it during a budget amendment, again, 3rd quarter. Equipment replacement schedules, I don't have those in here. They are part of the base budget at this point, as council has approved those in the past. So contributions are approximately 377,000, and that's includes vehicles, boat, taser, firearms, and body worn cameras. And then any remaining budget in 2022 will roll forward into 2023. As you know, it's kind of difficult to get vehicles, et cetera, right now. So we're kind of rolling forward those that funding. The additional item was the take-home vehicle program. It's not recommended to open that up at this time and maybe consider during the open period of the contract negotiations. So there's an additional item that was added into there, and I believe it's for the Bridge Mental Health Domestic Violence Advocate program. I believe that brings somebody in with them to help in those situations. So, with experience.
So I might be wrong, but I think at the Snohomish County Cities dinner we had last month, or this month, whenever it was, AWC was there presenting, and they said that they thought there was legislation coming in to have a grant program for the person that would be your records clerk for the body cameras. Have you heard that anywhere?
I haven't heard that, but I'll sure look into that.
I'm pretty sure that's what they said, but I could be wrong. on
That the legislature was going to create a grant program for
that.
that.
Right, yeah, something about, there was a grant program, the legislature was looking at it, and I thought it was for personnel, not for cameras, but I could be wrong about that.
Okay, well, that'd be wonderful.
But that was, it was brought up by AWC, so, okay, I mean, yeah, AWC.
I can call Candace tomorrow.
Yeah, I might be totally wrong on that. I might have misinterpreted what she was saying.
Was that Candace who was talking about that?
It wasn't Candace that was there.
Or
Sarah, I think.
the new director, Dawson?
Yeah, the director was there. She did a presentation, yeah. Like I said, though, I might be wrong. They talked about a lot of stuff.
So this is just a look at the overall org chart. It might be kind of hard to see. This just shows the proposed 2023 budget items that are full year, 3rd quarter, 4th quarter, and some changes. For example, if the application analyst is hired, then the GIS application analyst becomes just GIS analyst with no additional cost. So this just shows the differences and the changes that have been made. This is
I'd just like to point out that that map is a lot bigger than it was when I first got on
Yes.
council. Remember that?
There's more.
I mean, you can go to the left-hand side of that and cut it off, and that is what we had.
It's a quarter of the size.
Yeah.
of the first one.
Right.
So there's more in the red than
It was
City council.
a lot.
We discussed actually just taking a snippet of half of it to be able to show you a little better, but yes, this is definitely a great thing. And so this is just looking at the overall 2023 recommended budget summary, the requested versus the mayor's yeses. Based on the mayor's prudence and fiscal responsibility, he has reduced the overall request by 2.5 million, including staffing by approximately 700,000. And this is just our general fund forecasted.
Yeah, Barb, thank you for all your hard work. Thank you very much. But I just have a question. I bet you can guess what it's going to be about. It's on page 10. It's the administrative departments. Now, overall effects of additional recommendation. So is that like a final number when we vote on the budget? Would that $20,000 for the senior center, would that be like it? We're done
For 2023?
for 2023?
Yes.
And there's no
Future?
no possible raise in that amount? I'm just
And
asking.
that's for discussion amongst council and mayor recommendation. This is the mayor's recommendation. Council can
Okay,
choose something different if they please.
okay, it's just that I think of all the other senior centers in this county, and I think we don't measure up. Punto, as they say in Spanish, period. But I would love to see us think a little bit higher than that. Our seniors, the pandemic has been really hard on kids and for seniors as well. They've been isolated, they're struggling, and I just would like us to be supportive of our seniors. That's all. And I would like to see that figure to be higher than $20,000.
Did you have a recommendation? to
I
make
would
council?
recommend that we go $30,000. As we did last year with, of course, with pandemic money, I know, but still, I just think a higher standard for them would be a way of saying we do care. And we want, I know they're going to try to do a plan B down the road, but it's just not happening yet. And I know they're doing the best they can with what they have. That's just the way I feel about that. I think it's worth at least a consideration.
Isn't this the mayor's budget? We'll consider everything as we go.
That's what my question started out with.
This is
Yeah.
the mayor's budget. This
Right.
isn't,
This is the mayor's recommendation and you guys can have input
Okay,
if you,
that's why.
if you wish.
A good point. Mary, thanks for bringing that up. But there'll be changes to that as we see fit.
Okay,
You know, but it's the mayor and staff have done a great job of putting forth this
Right. I
information.
know they worked hard. I know. I appreciate that. Okay,
Okay, so this just shows you your general fund forecast. Obviously, it's all requests versus the mayor's request. Yes, it does show a negative. We are conservatively optimistic that we will get additional sales tax that we haven't input in here. We do have our Costco sales tax, et cetera, in here. Obviously, we haven't received any yet, so we're not 100% sure of the value. We are slightly conservative on that side. So as usual, just wanted to bring that forward. And then our street and stormwater funds look as they normally do. And then I just wanted to say that our next steps, obviously capital project budget, I'll bring that forward next week, and then we can have discussions. Council can make proposals on changes, and there'll be plenty of time for that. There won't be a lot, there won't be an extensive presentation next week, as it will just be capital project funds. And then council can make recommendations, and we'll move forward and work on the public hearings. And I did have a slide in here on it regarding our untapped revenues, which is our utility tax, et cetera, that we've talked about in the past. We don't have any of that recommended at this time, but just a mention of it.
Unless there's any discussion, President.
Any other questions for counselor or for staff, for thoughts that we have?
I don't necessarily have any questions. I think ultimately, especially looking at the last slide, I think the conversation at some point, we typically look at the budget, we look at the expenditures, and we look at the line dipping to the right. And I think the conversation that we never pivot towards is what are those proactive steps we can take to prolong that and continue the work that we're doing. And essentially that comes down to what are opportunities either that exist conventionally or probably unconventionally for the council, for the mayor, for staff, to look for opportunities to find new revenue sources, be those grants, be those new services. I think that's the conversation that we haven't historically had to a great extent. And I think that there might be some value in making that a priority, especially as we look at the projection 5 or 6 years down the road from today.
So, thank you for that. So I believe there was a request from you to have some feedback from staff on accessing those grants resources that we learned about in the trip to DC. Is that correct? It was either discussed last week or that we were going to get a presentation from staff on accessing that information those resources that we learned about in DC.
You want like a presentation? on
No,
that?
I don't know, Russ. I don't know if it was, I'm
Yeah,
not
I
sure.
gave a brief, just summary of the grants that we're currently looking at and some of the new resources and the other additional leads will obviously follow.
Okay, yeah, I thought that was a good point that was brought up, that we have more resources available to us than maybe we recognize.
I guess that kind of leads to a discussion as to, should we be looking at a full-time grants writer? Instead of burdening staff with, in the case of Director Wright, he has his community development division, but he's also writing grants. And so, I guess what is the return on that investment, you might say?
So we had that discussion when we came back, and I had that discussion with staff, and staff felt that they can handle that within themselves. They have their own specialties.
The problem with that, staff's always gonna say that. Okay, I mean, I would tell you the same thing. Oh, yeah, I can handle that. I'll just add it on to what I'm doing already.
You have such a little
But
burden.
we're all
too.
on the outside looking at it and saying, Russ is overworked.
And it kind of gets back to, I think you did mention last week about the amount of grants that are available at the federal level based on your trip back there. Somebody to actually go and find those versus, the general, Russ has his sphere of influence that he works in. Aaron does, they kind of have that little universe within their expertise, but the grants that you're talking about are outside that universe, those
Yeah, in the, when we visited with several of our federal delegation, they made it clear that there were additional funds out there. There were opportunities to submit specifically for community projects or other funding processes that we may not have, that we may not be fully leveraging.
Or even understanding the path to them.
Yeah, so, but it's just as a quick, because it threw me for a loop and was initially made. That was a conversation from 2 weeks ago, because I wasn't in attendance in the city council meeting last week. So I was initially a bit confused there. 2 weeks ago, yes. But I do, and certainly I brought it up before, the conversation around a grants coordinator or a contracted grant position or a part-time grant position. The ability to have someone focused and prioritized on the acquisition of grants. I'll share my personal experience. We were literally able to identify one grant that grew our fund balance by 25% year one. And that's the difference between focused staff working with the technical experts saying, these are the things that I need to find funds for, and technical staff doing the work of the day-to-day, and then also trying to find opportunities for grants.
To that, I would also say if we're looking at acquiring or being part of the sewer district, there's a tremendous amount of grants out there for infrastructure. I don't know what kind of grants they've received. It would be curious to know what kind of grants they've received or what kind of grants they've been going after, but that might be a really significant source after attending our last seminars and so forth. There is a tremendous amount for infrastructure, green technology. There's so many funds out there. And on that, just a quick question, did we take funding out for the health district on this budget?
We did not allocate money
Yeah, they're no longer.
We wouldn't need that because Snohomish County's taking that over. So that gives us, we've been doing $30,000-$40,000 for that. So there's other funds we can look at putting in other places.
So Gary, to your point, with the ROI on that, I mean, I don't know what your dollar value is, but knowing a general idea what your budget is, Sean, that's pretty significant. And that position more than paid for itself many times over. I talked to Angie and a comment she made that, talking to the federal delegates, like, hey, we've got this project, we need $2.5 million or something. And we're thinking, hey, that's a big deal for our city relative to our budget. They're like, oh, that's not a big deal. We can make that happen. Well, how do we access those funds? And so that's absolutely something. I think Russ, we nailed a $600,000 one for. Was this the museum? The museum. Yeah. So anyway, so that's certainly something that absolutely should be given consideration.
So I hear general consensus that we want to bring out a full-time grant writer.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate, I'm not trying to throw anybody of the staff out under the bus for trying to take on more work and, doing that. I know they can do it, but at the same time, I think that if you had a person that was dedicated to that, it's going to unload some of our staff to be able to, focus on something that might be, just as important in a different realm in their area. And I mean, I do, over the years, I've met a lot of, the staff, I know them, and sure, they'll take it on. But is it going to be that effective, or is it going to be less effective? And I think I'm in agreement with the rest of the council is that if we get a grant writer in, it's going to be more effective overall.
Maybe there's a partnership to be had with the sewer district and getting infrastructure for sewer districts for our underserved area over there as well.
Okay, we'll bring it forward.
You talking about the industrial complex.
And talking about the industrial complex specifically, there was so many classes that I was attending for underutilized areas where infrastructure would be important to bring industrial into communities for an underserved area, which that might very well might be.
So I have one more question, backing up just a little bit about the passports that we dropped off of the budget because we don't have a place for them. What would be the return on investment on having a passport office?
The only entity that I know that actually makes a profit off of that is Mill Creek. And they have a lot of seasonal / part-time staff. Granite Falls had intended to utilize theirs in that way and found that they are unable to do that to maintain consistent service. They had to hire 2 full-time benefited employees and a part-time. So it is not a profitable service.
Okay.
That's what you're asking.
Yes, that's what I'm asking.
But I think when they did the analysis, we're near break even. Okay.
I think I thought was that providing that service for a city of our size for citizens is more than a revenue generation. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to that discussion. City Council Planning Commission Coordination, Director Wright.
I just wanted to run through the staff report quickly. There had been sort of a question earlier in the year of how can the city council and the planning commission improve some of their coordination and communication. So what I wanted to present to you first is I did meet with the chair of the planning commission as well as the liaison from the city council to that board. We had a pretty good discussion and they came up with some findings that they had wanted to share, and that's what's included in the memorandum, starting with sort of the statutory authority for establishing a planning commission. What is their role? What is the city council's role? And historically, how have they communicated with one another? So going back to about 2015, we started doing this annual joint meeting between the 2 boards. Before that, there really hadn't been a dedicated work program. And so We started doing that in about 2015, creating that work program. So both the city council and the planning commission would have a good idea of what that board was working on throughout the year. Typically, the items that have been focused on might have been changes in state legislation. It might have been errors in the code. It might be just more modern principles in land use planning, et cetera. They could have been recommendations from the council. They could have been complaints that we've heard from the citizens. If we've done too many interpretations or granted too many variances, probably we needed to look at the code. So that's really become the basis of that work program, as well as the regulatory requirements from changes to the Growth Management Act, when we have to update, say, new shoreline code, new critical areas, and just to make sure that our plan is consistent. So that's what's formed the work program, and typically, as stated in the statute and carried over into our municipal code, the Planning Commission has that responsibility of being the technical expert, doing the hard work, looking at the recommendations that staff is bringing them, having presentations from our consultants, reading lots of reports, and disseminating that and bringing a recommendation to the city council. Often we like to take a step in between the Planning Commission's public hearing and the city council taking action, just to say, hey, here's where the Planning Commission is. Council, do you have any feedback, to make sure that there is that loop? So that's been the general process. There were some findings that sort of came out of that meeting that generally the liaison and the chair seem to think that the relationship is still working pretty well. Due to the heavy workloads of both boards, they weren't really interested in doing quarterly joint meetings, probably maintaining that annual meeting. But some of the new things that came out of it, staff, again, we raised our hand and said, we can do this, that we would volunteer to give some more in-depth quarterly reports to the council, sort of reporting out on what the actions of that body had been. Also, the liaison during the council reporting said that he would also be willing to give a little bit more in-depth commentary on the board's actions. And then the chair volunteered, or at least recommended, that with future chairs, it might be a good idea to invite them to the council's retreat once or twice a year, again, just to make sure that there's continued communication between the two boards. So that's kind of the point of the memorandum. And then I also included the 2022 work program and just put some highlights in there, where the Planning Commission is at with the work program this year, and some recommended carryovers. And basically, a lot of the carryovers relate to changes in state law, where we're working on a housing action plan. And so some of the code amendments aren't appropriate until that's done. Some of the critical areas or environmental type codes aren't appropriate to look at now until after we do our climate action plan. Anyway, there's just some list of recommendations of some carryovers. And I would love to turn it over to Councilmember Peter Shagan to see if he would like to share any of his thoughts from that meeting, and being both a long-term planning commissioner and liaison to that board.
Thanks, Russ. Yeah, we did, Todd Welch, myself, and Russ had a kind of a roundtable as to how we can better serve the communication lines between the Planning Commission and the City Council. And as Russ noted, we talked about more reports, I guess, from the Planning Commission, or more involvement. And didn't really think that would be too helpful. As you can see in this long range program, there's a lot of things that are overlapping and a lot of things that are happening simultaneously. So I guess I would put the question to the council, what would you like to see? I'd be happy to provide whatever. If we want to spend a couple minutes on a council meeting kind of doing a little more in-depth brief, I'd be willing to do that. We tend to take the approach that, be succinct and short, and not labor our reports. So I guess I would again ask to the council, if you'd like a more in-depth report back, I'd be happy to do that. And I am certainly willing to listen to your thoughts at this point. So everything's on the table.
Well, I would prefer a written report versus an oral report. So I can go back and reference that. It's helpful. And also so there's transparency for the public. So they know like what's going on, the progress that's being made. A lot more people pay attention to what we do here in council than what happens at planning commission meetings.
So would you like the minutes of the planning commission meetings? Would
You know,
that be
maybe
helpful?
maybe a summary of that would be helpful. And, you know, that would, I'd like, I mean, I would also add the Parks Board as well. I think that'd be helpful, not just that. It would be helpful to know their, I mean, actually, you know, library board, I mean, the ones, any information that we have is provided in there. So we just have updates as far as what's going on. I appreciate your wanting to respect the time here in council, so we're not putting out a long 15-minute presentation. You can just send a report and ask those questions on that.
I like the idea of including minutes. I realize then summarize them in a report is extra work for somebody, right? But I also, like, how much work would it be to add in the minutes of the commission, the boards?
Not much. It's
To
just,
our-
it's that delayed, you know, they gotta adopt the minutes the next
Right.
meeting and so forth. And then by the time they get on their.
Could there
packet, they're
be-
probably a month old.
But could there be draft minutes included in our packet that haven't necessarily been, I don't know how
I
quickly,
guess, but I mean.
how often do they get amended?
Not very often.
Well, each
Yeah.
board has a different meeting schedule. Say the planning commission is going to meet probably twice a month. Most boards meet once a month.
Sure.
Some of our boards meet once a quarter. So again, there is that the kind of lag.
Sure.
just The immediacy of the information.
I would, yeah, I agree. I think to be able to keep a little, and granted, I mean, I could go into the city website and click on the minutes and I can go through that way too. And I do think it would be good to be better informed just about, not just the planning commission, but you know, all the boards for what they're working on, and so that we aren't sort of surprised by things that come to us.
So what if, Angie, what if we, on this list of our normal meeting agenda, we include a boards commission meeting draft minutes or minutes, and on what stage they're at?
Sure.
And we just include that in as an add-in to the agenda packet.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. I really would advise that they be final minutes. Just if we have drafts out there, they get changed later, it gets quite confusing.
I would be fine with final minutes
The
versus
problem with
draft.
Final minutes is like the Parks Board could be 2 months later.
But so my counter to that is I've had 0 for years. I have 0 updates on what the Parks is doing. The Parks Board's having one that's 2 months delayed. It's better information. for
That
me
makes
than-
sense. That's a good point.
If that's acceptable. that's
Sure,
okay.
sure,
Yeah.
sure.
I mean, it's just a general information, and I think it's more for transparency for the city. And I really appreciate the people that are coming to these board meetings. There are a lot of people that look at council minutes and will ask me, I just got stopped this week. Someone pulled up their phone and said, hey, what about this? Pulled up the stuff and it caught me off guard, you know, but I want people that are doing that to be able to have that information.
Right.
Generally, what's going on is about those different things, because our boards are doing really good work. And I think the citizens should be aware of that.
I don't have a problem with improvements, but I just want to make sure I'm not hearing.
Maybe
minutes
let's,
are two
maybe
months
let's start with approved minutes and then see like, oh gosh, there's such a delay that this isn't relevant. And then like we can revisit that if that's.
Shut up.
Before, I like the idea of the written minutes. But I think there's a natural cascading consequence that happens over time. And I'd want to hear from staff how that's going to impact them.
Yeah.
We're going to say we want to see the written reports and we're fine with them being finalized and there being a delay of a month or in some cases 2 months. At some point in time, we're going to say, why are we seeing this before we're seeing minutes? And then it's going to impact the sequencing of the things coming before the board. So my question is, and really for staff, how big of an impact would a standard 1 month delay in those written reports have on the sequencing of our meetings to be able to continue with work moving forward?
As you were saying that, I was having sort of an alternate thought that maybe it's just the agenda for the board and commission is attached, then that queues up the council. Are there any topics on that upcoming agenda? Do you want to attend that meeting? Do you want to download the video yourself later? And then, as I guess more speaking towards the immediacy, as there is a department report section in the council's packet, we could come up with a standardized template that, it's a couple of bullets long. These were the topics sort of discussed, if there was citizen participation or not, and sort of when the next actions are taking place. So I understand the desire to possibly see the minutes, but I also think they're readily available, and it's maybe the topics that you want to see, and that they're all available on the website. And then we can give a little color commentary either orally to that after that next board meeting, if it's just an oral report from a department head or from the liaison, and again, it doesn't have to be, it can be as in-depth as the council wants, but if it's just a couple of bullet points, you have questions, we can obviously provide that additional detail. But I would say the material's already there. And from a records management standpoint, is it good practice to have it in multiple locations?
I would agree for transparency, seeing what the agenda is,
Right.
then we could look in and see if there is, for the sake of transparency.
Would it be helpful to have the work program maybe updated every quarter to see the progression of these things so that you know what's kind of coming?
Don't we upgrade
It's once a year.
once a year, should we update it once a year? And then items get added, right?
And then what?
Then items would get added to the planning commission?
They may, or they get bumped aside or carried, like tiny houses here. It's not started. It was planned for third quarter of 22. It's carried over to 2023 after the housing action plan's completed.
I would want to know if something gets added for sure.
And I like the
Yeah.
quarterly, I think quarterly updates make sense.
Yeah.
Then you can kind of track the issues that are coming.
So I don't think we're adding anything without
Not typically.
approval.
Mm.
Things are going to get shifted. Yes.
I don't know that short-term rental ordinances. were
Short-term
on-
rental was not on the planning.
It's right here, the first quarter, of 2022. It's right there, number 2.
Oh, tourist home update. Okay.
So I think, Marcus, I agree with you. Thank you, Russ, for that suggestion. I think the agenda would be helpful, and maybe if there's a significant item, a staff report that's attached to that with there, because those are usually succinct and provide a high level view of what information is there. I guess in thinking of that suggestion, that's probably better than the minutes. And so that's going to provide us with current information. If there's something that's helpful and that needs to be discussed, we can reference staff or liaison and get that. Any other thoughts from council? We've got 2 in favor of the agenda versus the minutes. Mary, I see. a hand
Yeah, I
up.
think the agenda makes perfect sense. So we know what they're working on.
To update quarterly.
No, the agendas for the different boards and commissions for their meetings and. So we
okay.
have that.
And then a quarterly update on the work.
But the quarterly update on the work plan is also, I'm supportive of that as well. To make sure we're staying on track, that we're not deviating, from that work plan. If we are, what the thought process is, and what
Yeah, I support that. That's a good happy medium. And, I was really concerned this was going to turn into a lot of work that was going to ultimately impact all of us negatively and continuing to move work forward.
And I would invite planning commission meets second and fourth Wednesday of every month. If you're really curious as to what they're up to, tune in.
They do have Zoom links and.
Yep. Zoom meeting or in person. Yep. 6 o'clock.
Being passed, are we going with that?
Yes.
Being passed to you is the proposed agenda for next Tuesday.
Anybody else need a copy? I've got about 7 more.
We'll take two. Pass it back.
Yeah, it's back in there.
So you'll see we have Doug Levy here, and then as well as Justin, Doug's replacement will be here as well. Got an update from Summers Health District, a proclamation, some city department business. And then we'll do a public hearing on STRs. And the action items, do some more, we'll do a 2022 budget amendment, updated city fee schedule, continue to talk about 23 budget, and then executive session for potential litigation.
How many items are with
One.
Yeah.
So short-term rentals is a hearing again, but not an action item.
It would be looking for council's action after the continued public hearing.
So then we would vote on it perhaps. next week.
Yes.
I think to say that the 2022 budget amendment is going to be a discussion item. So you see that twice. Discussion item and then a note from that.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so we'll move that to a discussion. item.
That was the budget amendment.
The 2022 budget.
It's just in discussion.
Yeah, we'll move it to discussion and then put it on consent for the next time. Oh, so there may be two subjects for the executive session. Potential litigation.
So are we, what can we do to mitigate the challenges we have with those? Executive sessions, like we've had challenges with audio and,
We've done it already. One, we'll have Greg here. Greg has decided to accompany us personally. And if we have anybody online, that new system that we.
Yeah, I've gotten positive feedback.
Yeah. I'm with you. It was painful.
well, I know one that we had, you weren't able to participate
Right.
because there was some challenges, so we just want to avoid that going forward.
Yeah,
So,
I think we've cracked that nut. Good. We have anything else?
Move to adjourn.
Let's adjourn. Sounds
Do
like
it.
we even need to move.
We don't even need to move it. We can just do it.
Thanks for everyone's work. Good stuff.